how do you look at blood sugar and carbohydrates?
In a very individualized way is the short answer. So I've learned over my many years of clinical practice that there's no one size fits all approach. We can make some generalizations about carbohydrate intake for different categories of people, and I will do that in a second. But I will always preface that by saying it depends. Some people who are in one of those categories that you would expect to respond in a certain way don't respond in that way, and so it's just very important to keep that in mind. Generally, people, in my experience, who have metabolic issues and or are overweight do better on low carbohydrate diet. It's There's lots of studies to support this, that the low carbohydrate diet is often more effective than a low fat diet in this population. It often leads to better changes in markers of metabolic health and inflammation, et cetera. You often see more weight loss and ability to keep that weight loss, keep that weight off over time. And I would say I've definitely found that to be largely true in my clinical practice over the years. Now, there are exceptions, as I mentioned. I've had people with those in that situation not do well on low carb diets and actually do better on either a moderate carbohydrate diet or even a lower fat diet. Believe it or not, it's kind of surprising to me when that happens, but it has happened on a few occasions. There are other situations that low carbohydrate intake can be beneficial as well, like neurological conditions, for example. Kids, I've worked with a lot of kids and adults with epilepsy, and a very low carb and keto, preferably ketogenic diet, and sometimes deeply ketogenic diet can be a lifesaver for people with severe intractable epilepsy that are not, that are failing the drug therapies, or those drugs are horrible. And so even if the drugs are working in terms of preventing seizures, they have a lot of nasty side effects. And a ketogenic diet under the right supervision can be an absolute game changer for people in that condition. But other neurological conditions too, like Parkinson's, we'll often use a ketogenic diet for people with early stage or even later stage Parkinson's and see very big changes, because the brain prefers ketones to glucose as a fuel source. And especially in conditions like Parkinson's, which are thought to involve difficulty processing glucose in the brain, then substituting ketones for glucose as the primary fuel source can make a huge difference. On the flip side, there are some situations where I think lower carb intake is not beneficial, or at least would give me pause, and I would think twice about it. And one is for kids, and especially young kids and adolescents and teenagers who are growing and developing quickly. I think very low carbohydrate diets can be problematic. It can be difficult for them to get enough calories. It can be difficult. I think that there's some potential risk there. Same thing with pregnant women. Obviously, if a pregnant woman has gestational diabetes, a lower carbohydrate intake may be warranted. But in just a general, uncomplicated pregnancy, I think a moderate carbohydrate intake is better. I would say that women in general, if I was to make a broad generalization, are less likely to succeed with a very low carbohydrate diet than males. Now, that we're talking about like 50% of the population on both sides here. So there's a very broad generalization, and obviously depends a lot on the individual circumstances. There are a lot of women who thrive on low carb and ketogenic diets, particularly women who have metabolic issues or other issues. But in some cases, it can do things with female hormones that are not desirable, and end up producing some side effects. Sometimes people with chronic stress and sleep issues don't do particularly well with a very low carb diet, especially if they're not eating any carbohydrates at night. That can exacerbate the sleep problems. Those are just a few examples, but this is why I'm such a big believer in individualizing the approach, and not just relying on standard kind of prescriptions based on what population you find yourself in.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Most recent research suggests that over 90% of Americans fall short of the optimal intake of not just one, but several micronutrients. This is also true in other developed countries around the world. So there definitely has been a decline.